All right, welcome to another edition of On-Prem Pros. I'm Ryan Brown with the xByte Cloud team, and today I'm joined by Tyler Young. He's one of our engineers from xByte Technology. So Tyler, welcome today.
Thank you.
And today we're going to be talking about a customer journey that he had. This customer came to xByte Technologies, and they wanted to kind of redo some of their infrastructure. They had single servers that were running everything, and they wanted to move to shared storage. And they came to us and they said, "Hey, look, I want 3 shared storage boxes for redundancy purposes." And we listened to what their needs were, and we pitched them that. We gave them that option, but we wanted to also go over today another option that we presented to them. Now, before we begin, I do want to say thank you to our sponsors. Our sponsor, xByte Technologies. So they handle all of our post production for us. And so if you need anything with our hardware, please check out xbyte.com and they can help you out. So we'll get out of the way. So Tyler, this is a big waste management company.
Yeah.
So they're looking at some options. They have multiple locations. So why don't you go into, I gave a little bit of a setup. Why don't you go into some of the details about what they told you when they first came to you?
Yeah, definitely. So, first off, like I said, right, these guys came to us and they had a bad experience when they had a server, crash and they were, had to, kind of fall back on their recovery plan. It took a long time, right? Wasn't to the standard that, that they needed it to be. And it just, took time and cost the company money, more than they intended to. So, they came to us looking for 3 SANs, with servers, to a Hyper-V cluster connected to each of those. And they were going to, deploy those at, 2, potentially 3 different locations. And we, when we kind of dug into the why, because that's, again, like one of the biggest driving factors about, these conversations is the why, right? We want to find out what's driving this and, why, we're looking to do what we're trying to do and what your expectations are. And, they said a couple things that kind of, indicated that we might have a better solution in mind, not entirely, but just tweaking what they want to do a little bit. So, long story short, they, essentially were looking for server storage and networking. We tweaked it a little bit. And instead of doing 3 SANs and, hosts at each of those locations, we turned to doing 2 SANs, and, servers, of course, switches, and then a PowerProtect, a backup appliance, which is, under the Dell's PowerProtect.
All right, let me go ahead and bring up the topology diagram so you can
That'll
see
be
that.
perfect. Perfect.
So here's everything for everybody they can see.
Yep. So this is essentially everything that we're, trying to, accomplish here, right? This is the topology that we put together to kind of explain how, the lay of the land would work. So, right, you can see on the left, right, the primary site where we're looking at deploying, 4 1U servers. So they're going to be the PowerEdge R650s. And those are going to be
I'm zooming in here for you guys a little bit.
perfect. Thank you. We're going to be connecting those to the PowerVault ME5, which is where all the VMs are going to essentially live. And what that's going to essentially allow them to do is just run their production environment, right? In addition to that, the customer said, well, I want to make sure that if we were to have an outage on our primary site, that we can essentially, recover from that, right? We want to make sure that all of our VMs are, replicated somewhere else. That's where the DR site comes in. They had a location not too far away. It was, safe enough distance where natural disaster, shouldn't be able to, hit both of them simultaneously, but it's, close enough where they can have, a pretty, like I said, enable the async replication between the 2 sites. So, at that second site, we're going to be running, half the amount of hosts. So 2 of the 1U servers connected to an ME5, and those ME5s are going to be replicating asynchronously to one another. So essentially, whatever happens on, on that primary site and is being written and read onto that ME5 at the primary location is going to be replicated to that secondary site. Now, we talked about instead of doing a 3rd SAN that was intended to essentially be used to just store their backups, we said, hey, instead of just doing a SAN that's not going to be acting as a SAN, but more so a backup repo, let's not do a 3rd SAN and let's look at, some of Dell's, backup, backup appliances that they have for what you're trying to accomplish. And that's where the PowerProtect DD6400 comes in. It's one of the models under the PowerProtect line. of Dell's data domains. And essentially what that is instead of doing a SAN, this is an appliance that essentially is fully designed to just store your backups. And it's nice because you can deploy multiple, even if they're differing models. You can essentially have your own private cloud between sites. And where some of the smartness comes into play is you'll have, not only, extremely fast throughputs, right? You can have throughputs of, hundreds of terabytes per hour, right? So much faster download speeds than what they're seeing today. But in addition to that, you can also see dedupe and compression ratios of up to 65-1 or even greater, meaning that if you have a single terabyte of capacity, you can essentially store up to 65 terabytes of data after dedupe and compression on that or greater. But what that's going to allow them to do is essentially now take the data that's being replicated from primary to the DR site and back that up back to the data domain that's sitting at the primary location. And where that comes into play here is, say these guys were writing a file onto their primary ME5, and maybe that file is corrupted. Well, that file is automatically going to be replicating to that secondary SAN. So now what you have a corrupted file at both the primary and the DR site. So what do? That's where, okay, cool. We have our backup, we have the snapshot stored on our PowerProtect DD6400 at the primary site. We're going to recover from that, extremely fast, right? If they need additional performance, they can enable DD boost for a much faster throughput, but nonetheless, they can essentially, go back to a healthy state rather than, dealing with that, that corrupted file. But then an issue comes into play where they brought up to us, well, what if we lose that main site, right? We want to make sure that our backups are, in a geo-redundant state. So that's where we said, okay, well, then that's easy. We just deploy a PowerProtect unit at both the primary and the DR site, right? So now you have the, data being replicated from SAN1, right? We'll just call it, ME51 to ME52. And then the backups go from ME52 to the data domain 1. And then that's again asynchronous replicating to data domain 2. Now it's cool because the customer took it a step further and they said, well, hold up, does this protect me against ransomware? While yes, the PowerProtect does protect from ransomware, it's important to note that you need to have the PowerProtect deployed in such a way where you're protecting it as well. Meaning that if the PowerProtect is yes going to help you protect from ransomware and malicious attacks, but it's important that you need to keep that offline. So what the customer is doing is they're actually deploying a PowerProtect same model at a third site, which is known as a cyber recovery site, and that's essentially all that is going to be is their data vault. So what that's going to do is it's going to be using AI and machine learning to essentially take the backups that are being replicated across the other two data domains, and it's going to, receive it, it's going to receive it into the vault. But as soon as that handshake happens, it cuts itself offline, creating that air gap. So now it's off network. And before it puts it into long-term retention, it's utilizing cyber recovery and CyberSense to walk through all the files to ensure that that data that is about to be put into long-term retention is free of any malicious coding, any ransomware, anything bad, right? So then that third cyber recovery site is essentially a full, end-to-end protected, data vault. And I know I did a lot of kind of deep diving in there, so I'll kind of pause and see if any questions, if you want to expand on any of that, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and zoom back out here.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing, so we were talking to this, we're talking earlier about this customer and their budget on things, is that the budget is a concern. I mean, there's not with most organizations, there's not an infinite budget.
Right.
So they came to us with one option, and so in your gray circles, they're going to first implement the DR site because they said, hey, look, if we get DR working, then that gives us a lot of protection. So so file corruption, right now they do have Acronis, and so that can work for them for file corruption for right now. But they said, hey, you know what? We don't like having to wait for stuff to come down from the cloud, and so we want to move local on that. So
it took them 14 hours to recover from the cloud. I mean, so that's 14 hours of downtime. That's not including the time it took them to kind of go through the motions of it as well, and then also check everything. And that's a long time, especially, I mean, you have employees just sitting there waiting to work. I mean, it's a long time and a lot of money lost.
Yeah. So they said, okay, first we want DR. So actually, first they want high availability.
Yep.
So they're moving to. So they're doing a lot of stuff. So
They're doing a
there's
lot of new stuff,
yeah.
right? They're getting high availability now. They're getting much faster, recoveries. They're getting their own private cloud instead of having to rely on the public cloud or, any sort of, private cloud vendors. So they're doing a lot of hands-on. And I mean, you brought up budget and, one would think, oh, this is going to be super expensive, right? I mean, it's crazy because the budget they allocated for the 3 SANs and all of the servers, I mean, going with the PowerProtects is honestly not too much more money, especially because we're talking about the 65 to 1 data reduction, guarantee on those power protects. So that's something where, I mean, we're able to save them a lot of money by being more efficient with this. And again, right, we're, taking, we actually said, hey, right, let's not do a third SAN today. Let's get you to the right solution and do a phased approach. And they went back to the higher ups and they, bounced that off them, said, hey, right, we can do this the right way for not too much more money more, or we can do it the way we wanted to do it. And it's not going to be as efficient and it's not going to give us as, deep of a protection as what it could. And the C levels saw the value in doing this two-phased approach. And yeah, they absolutely love this. So,
That's great to hear. Now, I took away the topology for a second here. We'll just kind of talk about the solution itself. In
mhm.
general, would you recommend the customers follow that same kind of plan where if they don't have DR right now, to focus on DR being the primary issue, and then adding in the Power Protect, or could you not do the DR and just spend that budget on a Power Protect and an air gap Power Protect?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really comes down to what the customer's expectation is, what their pain points are today. Because if you ask, 100 different customers, what their pain points, what their expectations are, what their, issues they're having today, right? They're all going to be different, right? There might be some similarities in those, but I mean, if one customer is more so focused on, hey, right, we were hit by ransomware or we have a friend hit by ransomware, that's our focus, right? If another customer is like, hey, listen, we're going to roll the dice and not worry about ransomware today. We just want to make sure that if we had a short-term outage, due to, fire in the data center or due to, corruption or anything like that, right? We want to make sure that we can fail over and have that, that site to site, a geo redundancy from a production standpoint. We can still run our production mission critical workload. So it really comes down to what the customer is most fearful of. I hate to say it, but that's really kind of what drives a lot of these. But also too, I guess what makes sense based on their architecture. I mean, some customers may not have several physical locations where they can, deploy it like this. And maybe we have to look at it from a different perspective, or maybe a customer is like, hey, listen, right, I don't think that I'm ever going to be in a place where I'm truly needing to have 3 power protects, right? I'm just gonna, say, hey, I'm comfortable enough having a single power protect to store my backups, and then I'm going to have a second power protect, completely offline, air gapped, and that's gonna be my data vault. So, it really comes down to what the driving factors are from the customers. But I've seen at this point, I've only been in this for 5, 6 years in the industry, but I've seen quite a bit from, a DR strategy being a USB drive that's brought home every
Oh
night,
yeah,
and that was what they're comfortable with. So I mean, it's and if that's you, no, no offense to you, but
yeah.
it's it really comes down to what your comfort level was and what's worked for you for years. So I mean, it's we've seen it all.
And for those listening, it's not there's never a hardcore. This is the right answer.
Yeah.
And things can evolve. You could be a USB or you could be a tape drive where you know what I take every day. I take a tape drive with me, or once a week I take the tape drive with me home, and that's my kind of my DR
Mhm.
strategy, and that can work. And as your company grows, you may need more, and so
Yeah.
then you can kind of grow to any of this. So just like as we talked about this example, this customer had access to multiple locations, had a fear of a site going down, so they wanted to have that DR. But you could start with just your single site and a Power Protect,
Yeah. And
and then
funny
that could be
enough,
your solution without even air gapped, and then add an air gap, and then add a DR site as the needs and as the expense of you being down grows.
yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of times we're not even doing, some of these projects until a customer has a bad experience, right? Just think about this. The main driving factor of this originally was the customer for years loved having physical servers with just a backup in, the cloud until they had to rely on, the recovery process from the cloud, and it took them 14 plus hours. Now they said, wow, okay, I don't like that long recovery time. And I don't like that I didn't have a second fail safe in place where, as soon as I lost my production site, I was forced to go to the, my recovery, my backup. So that's where they said, okay, let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's, let's have something to where if I lose a server or if I lose even a site, I can still be up and running via geo redundancy. And on top of that, let's make sure that, this is going to be a much faster recovery process than what we experienced. So, I mean, that's perfectly in line with what I see a lot of the times is, customers typically don't evolve what they're doing today until they or someone close to them experience something that, was just such a pain point that they don't want to go through that again. So,
Yeah, if you're a large waste management company and you have employees out there, if all of a sudden you can't work for a day, then you got to figure out how to do that. People have taken their yard waste or their trash or their recycling out, and you got to now reschedule all that. So it can be I mean, in that organization, it's a big expense to try and if they're down to that 14 hours. So I can see why they're now say, you know what, we now have a budget. It sucks, but until you need it, you don't need it. Now they have a budget, so they can avoid that in the future.
absolutely.
All right, Tyler. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great story. We kind of talked through a real customer example. We gave them a couple options and some scenarios where anyone can grow. So it's been very, very beneficial. And again, thank you to our sponsors, xByte Technologies. If you, again, need anything hardware-wise, check out xbyte.com. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.